Thanks very much, Tim, for the invitation to be here today, and I too would like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and pay my respects to their elders past and present. It's very fitting that we're in the Holmes Refectory building this morning. The last time I was here was the first time, I believe, that the University of Sydney brought together all of its cancer researchers in one place at one time. And it was as we were trying to get funding out there for the translational cancer research centres. This is a place which does bring people together and gives us the opportunity to have conversations that otherwise would not occur. I like the concept of a half-life of knowledge. And what I want to reflect on this morning is that half-life of knowledge goes down to nanoseconds when you actually put some data on the table. You know, we have strong beliefs about how our health system is performing, and those beliefs have been challenged every single time we've put new data on the table. And so the half-life of knowledge shrinks from infinite, we're doing a really great job, to, oh my God, is that us? And that's what I want to reflect on this morning as we think about where to from here. Really just three themes for this morning. And we'll start with the principles that underpin our use of data. Because I think this is the challenge for us. It's one of the great barriers if we get it wrong, and for far too long we have accepted that data should not be used for the common good. I had occasion when I was at Cancer Australia to get the Federal Privacy Commissioner to come and speak to the heads of cancer, both politically, bureaucratically and clinically. And he sent along the Assistant Commissioner, and he put up on the whiteboard as he walked in a 5-letter acronym. I can only usually remember 3-letter acronyms, but I can remember this one. It was BOTPA, B-O-T-P-A, because of the Privacy Act. And the Commissioner turned and said to the audience, I am sick of hearing that you can't do things because of the Privacy Act. It is an enabling act that you should be using to make sure that you are using data to improve the quality of care. So the Privacy Commission was very clear that we should be using data and we should be using it strongly. So the first thought with which I'd like to start this morning is that these data belong to the people about whom they're collected. That one of the greatest things that patients can do is actually will us their data, to say to us, as they do tacitly and when asked explicitly, please use those data to improve the clinical care that we offer. That's the expectation of the majority of the community, and I think over the last couple of decades, when we've had opportunity, we have failed the community in that regard. Having said that, we need to make sure that data are used appropriately, but ultimately, this is about improving care. So there is an ethical imperative to use these data. The ethical imperative is strongly in favour of aggregated, de-identified data to actually inform what we do. Otherwise, we drive blindly, and we've been happy to drive blindly for far too long. It's also, therefore, an imperative to make these data as widely available as possible to bona fide clinicians and to researchers. There's much more data than we will ever be able to analyse, and we need as many helping hands in that process as possible. So what does it look like today? We have a system that is data-rich but information-poor. We have huge repositories of data, some of it difficult to access because it's in free fields, and natural language parsing still has a way to go. But it's there. Hand in hand with that, we've got very little local knowledge and very poor integration, and Tim's already talked about the systems that are the repositories for these data. Very poor integration across clinical data and information technology. HL7 actually doesn't mean all that much when you come to the coalface to use it. As a clinician, what feedback did I ever get? Absolutely none at a systems level. What was my performance as a clinician compared to my peers within this health system or within other health systems? To this day, I have no idea. I got lots of flowers, mostly from funerals, lots of chocolates, as you can see, and a few thank you cards. That was it. And we run a multi-billion-dollar health system with that level of feedback to clinicians. What do planners have? Well, a little more. We count people who are born and die, and we count a few things in between, but we've got massive gaps where the data are already there, but we're not using them. So who are the leaders today? You'll hear from Shoni Philpott later in the morning. And data harvesting, Queensland are clearly doing some really great work that is leading the country and arguably well beyond our borders. Data linkage, we've looked to Western Australia for years, but I think we have a number of states that are catching up, and the Centre for Health Record Linkage in New South Wales is doing extraordinary work. In analysis, we're good at traditional analyses, but what about hypothesis-free analysis of large data sets? We've got a couple of academic groups that are doing that in banking, in security, in defence, in taxation. What are we doing about bringing that into health? What are we doing about developing our next generation of investigators? And in data presentation, we often look to Canada because they are imaginative about how they convey data to us succinctly and effectively. We've got international evidence, which we rarely actually bring down to the national or local level, and yet again, those opportunities are there for us. And to take from the Australian Commission on Safety and Quality in Healthcare, I do like the language. Data to knowledge to wisdom. And if we take to information to knowledge to wisdom, we have a cycle there that we can really use. I think we're now in a position where many of us are experiencing the benefit of data to information, and maybe even information to knowledge. Knowledge to wisdom is a pretty big step, and I'd like to think that that's in the foreseeable future for many of us. So what progress have we made? I want to reflect briefly on a few of the things that we've been doing at the Cancer Institute New South Wales. Again, there are other initiatives in other states and territories, and obviously in other jurisdictions internationally, but let's look locally. We've set out to adjust our data by a number of key factors, and this was quite deliberate. So people couldn't say, but my patients are different. And so from day one, all of the data were adjusted to deal with that. We've done some great work, and Jane Young's here this morning looking at how we can derive functional status from surgical records, how we can derive comorbidity from hospital admission records in the last 1, 3 and 5 years. We've looked at a number of factors, particularly in surgery, but we're moving into radiation and medical oncology now. Importantly, this is able to follow people across the health system. So again, one of the challenges for clinicians is, so the person's not readmitted to your hospital. Do you know they're in hospital? Or that patient actually died after discharge or in another hospital. This allows us to take a genuine statewide approach in public and private hospitals. So we started this journey back in 2010, and it was the Upper Gastrointestinal Tract New South Wales Oncology Group that really championed the issue of volume outcome relationships. The details here are probably not all that important. It was the volume of esophageal cancer surgery by principal referral hospitals A on the left through to the private on the right. There are a couple of things to note. The public and private don't look all that different. And yes, we had people doing esophagectomies every 4 years at an institution. Now, ladies and gentlemen, a little audience participation this morning. Who wants to go to an institution that last did an esophagectomy in mid-2013? and yet we expect patients will take whatever we serve them. None of us would go there, and if I had $1 for every phone call I got from concerned friends or relatives, where should I go? I've just been diagnosed with cancer X. It would be a very different world. We looked at mortality, again adjusted for those factors we've already seen, and yes, there's a twofold difference between what Queensland call medium volume centres and what we've termed high volume centres, probably quite misleadingly in New South Wales. But a twofold difference in 90-day mortality. Again, where do you want to go? Where do you want your mother, your aunt, your sister, your cousin? Why should there be that postcode lottery? Now, the big challenge of this is that all of those data come from 3 data sets linked: the admitted patient data set, the cancer registry, and the death index, all of which have been in existence since 1972 at least. So for 45 years we've had those data, and yet really they were linked together and interrogated for the first time in 2010. Why did we set a threshold of 6? Well, you've already seen that it changed, but again, the scatter plot here is very clear. When you move below 6, the noise of the signal increases dramatically, and the chance of death also does. So has it changed the system? Well, as you can see, in that 4-year period, we actually halved the number of patients who had an operation in a low-volume centre. You say that's great, but it does leave, in 2013, 22 people who were still having their surgery in a centre that, on average, was doing about 1.5 procedures a year. How has it changed over a decade? Well, the good news is if we look at 2014, we were down to 94% of patients having their surgery in a higher volume centre, up from 50% in 2005. So the system can change in response to data. So can outcomes. And so here we have a 5% absolute increase in 1-year survival, having survived the first 30 days after surgery across much the same time period. And yet we're still not at world's best with that. But again, I stress, these data have been available for 45 years, just never linked and taken forward. And then the real sting in the tail when you start to look at whole systems rather than institutions. A twofold difference across the state in whether you're likely to be offered a procedure in the first place, depending on where you live. In fact, if you live in a local health district with low volume centres, you are half as likely to be offered a procedure in the first place and twice as likely to be dead by 90 days. It's not a great equation. But again, those data have been there, and our ethical imperative is to link the data and to use it to plan services and to improve the care we offer. Has it helped? Again, 1-year survival. The blobs are institutions. Big blobs do more work. Little blobs do less work. You draw the conclusions from this. What's it meant for consumers? And Tim touched on this in his introduction. In honesty, it took us 4.5 years to negotiate it, but those centres that have 6 or more procedures a year are now up on the website for consumers to consult. And that's updated, it's public and private, so if there's a private hospital there, it's because they have agreed to be named. And that's there for 3 tumour streams, and I hope that we can accelerate rapidly the number of tumour streams where those data, with current New South Wales information underpinning it, are available to consumers. That led to the Reporting Better Cancer Outcomes program. It's in its 7th year. It's a cycle of meetings, not just one, but certainly an important annual meeting with the chief executives and the directors of cancer services and whoever else they want to bring. Now, almost all of those are jointly with primary health networks. Primary health networks get a separate report, but they're coming together with the local health districts. In year 5 of that process, we put out de-identified local health district information onto the website for the first time. So there was plenty of time to get one's house in order. And last year it went out as identified data by local health district with the support of every chief executive in the state, almost instantly returning that email. So the information is now out there, and I want to pay tribute to the Bureau of Health Information because they've enabled us to have these conversations both with chief executives and more broadly with the community. We've now got 5 of those meetings as co-located public-private campus-wide meetings, and I'm delighted that one of the outcomes of reporting better cancer outcomes to date has been that 3 of those campuses have already agreed that patients will shift between institutions on the campus to increase critical volumes in those institutions. So we'll take all of the head and neck to the private, and we'll bring all of the esophageal cancer surgery to the public. Now, that sort of consolidation, even within a campus, has not been seen before at a systems level. Provide high-quality information, knowledge, and you start to see wisdom in the system. We worked with Bureau of Health Information for patient-reported measures, and I've just highlighted 3 here because it's important for us to think about. How did our hospitals go? And you can see institutions are identified. That's the Bureau of Health Information's basic tenet for releasing data, and we see some variation. This was asking about aspects of care as an outpatient, and I just draw your attention to the lowest one here, which asked, were you told how long you had to wait for the appointment to start after you arrived at a clinic? 72% of people said no. How difficult is it in a patient-centered system to just have our front of house staff say to people, it's likely to be 3/4 of an hour, go get a coffee. How many of us appreciate that? And here we've got patients telling us very explicitly, it's not okay. And this one really is extraordinary. This is the Edmonton Symptom Assessment Scale. It was asked a couple of months after people had attended clinic, and we've got clinically significant differences across the state. Really astounding differences across the state in the symptom control that we offer in cancer care. Unacceptable variation. But I do want to champion Mid-North Coast and Northern New South Wales, who were outstanding. In 4 of the 8 categories, they were better than everyone else, statistically and clinically. What's their secret? They've had that feedback loop for about 4 years. The clinicians are used to seeing patients come in with a form that says, my pain's not well controlled today, my nausea is not great, my depression is not what it should be, and people respond. In the light of Ethan Bash's presentation at the American Society of Clinical Oncology this year, where he got a plenary for outcomes related to symptom control, outcomes that are really important, mortality, and showed that there was a difference if you had good symptom control across large populations of people with cancer. These are important data. And it's again across the spectrum. So smoking data broken down by age, gender, and then to local health district level to see how we've made progress over the last decade or 2 in that area. To look at how we deliver services. So who does PAP tests across the state? And you can see that the role of gynecologists is really high in affluent local health districts, and the role of women's health nurses in rural and remote. As we think about how we fractionate radiotherapy for early stage breast cancer, we have a 10-fold difference across the state. From 7% of women having hypofractionation in one centre up to more than 74% in the highest performing area. Again, is that variation warranted? And if not, what are you and I going to do about it? We also make sure that people have information about patient flows by local health district of residence, which is tremendously important. This is not about where people are treated alone. This is where they live on our y-axis and where they're treated on the x-axis. This allows us to start to think about how patients are moving across the state. Now, I've deliberately put colon cancer up there because we see no variation in outcomes: 30-day, 90-day mortality, 1-year survival, 1-year conditional survival, 5-year absolute survival, number of admissions within 28 days of discharge, or the percentage of people who have more than 21 days in hospital across the state. And yet we've got people driving past 5 or 6 hospitals to go to a Saint or a Royal, needlessly dissociating themselves from their own support network. If we look at it another way, clearly some of that travel is really a great concern for people, and for the Isolated Patient Travel Assistance Scheme, there's a real challenge here as we think about needless travel where you can get world-class outcomes far closer to home. And when we think about rectal cancers, again, we've got this long tail. We've got change over time, but we've also got emergency procedures, because as we moved around the state, lots of people said, yes, well, we do an occasional one, but it's an emergency. Well, actually, the pink isn't there all that much. So again, a nanosecond of half-life of knowledge from infinite to very finite. There's a problem here, and we need to address it. Clinical trials, how are we doing there? A feedback loop to really understand how our investment in clinical trials is affecting clinical care and taking that work forward. So with that sort of broad brushstroke picture, what can the future look like? This is all about improving outcomes for people diagnosed with cancer, but it's beyond that. It's taking real ownership of cancer wherever we are. It's not only lifting the tide, it's also closing the gap. And that gap is not just for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. It's for people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, people from socioeconomically varied backgrounds, rural and remote, and people with limited health literacy. We need to look at structured data far more. And the investment by the Royal Australasian College of Pathologists, of Cancer Australia, Cancer Institute New South Wales, to get structured reporting for pathology needs to be replicated in imaging and in interventional procedures. We also, in all of this, need to make a really clear distinction between quality assurance, business as usual, and where it crosses over into research. And if it's going to cross over into research, there is only one thing, and that is that it has to go to the Ethics Committee. And we've been bad in both directions there, and I think we need a conversation to help the future. Our vision is very simple at the Institute. We've got the population registry. We've got a clinical cancer registry that is sitting behind that and adding granularity that is urgently needed. But most importantly, the future has to be routine, point-of-care, patient-reported measures. Because that needs to feed in to the linked data set. And when we start to get that voice, we will have confidence that we have a picture that can really make a difference. We need to provide timely feedback to clinicians individually about their performance, that performance is contextualized with their peers and colleagues, and that it genuinely compares like with like. So the linked data that we have today includes all of those data on the slide now. That's in existence. And we've got a great opportunity. I've highlighted the ones that were used to help in the analyses that we've seen, but it's really exciting to see that move forward. And the future, when we add in the pharmaceutical benefits schedule, the Medicare benefits schedule, and patient-reported measures, is going to be a really exciting future. We're weeks away from getting the PBS data. We're a little further away, I believe, at getting the Medicare data, but you just have to be young and patient in this game. So what should it look like in 5 years' time? We want to have strong clinician leadership. And that means that we need to work with clinicians to understand large data sets, their strengths, their weaknesses, the opportunities and their limitations. So we need to have another generation of clinicians who are used to using large data sets and really working with them. We need timeliness in that. We need analytic plans that will be harmonised across state and territory borders and across international borders, as well as harmonisation of the measures that we actually use. In all of that, we need to support data availability at the source. We need to use electronic medical records in order to capture key data and to take that forward. This can't be a manual process, and we need to rapidly make that transition. We need sustainable data extraction, local data access, but that local data access has to be contextualised more broadly, or we will continue to be inward-looking. And we need to extend our data sets as new knowledge becomes available. What are the key factors that we need in a pathology report today? What will they be in 2020 or 2025? I want to leave you with a challenge. This also means that clinicians and the system more broadly need to reimagine this question. Who takes ownership of a cancer stream? I'm not talking about the people who are referred to each centre and the centre providing great care. I'm asking the question, who actually looks after lung cancer in southeast Sydney? Not lung cancer at Prince of Wales, lung cancer at St George, lung cancer at St Vincent's, lung cancer at Sutherland, but who takes ownership of lung cancer in southeast Sydney? The people who don't get from GP to respiratory physician, or don't get from respiratory physician to a multidisciplinary team. These data challenge us because we are going to have to reimagine that ownership. That ownership can no longer be simply a clinician saying, well, I've seen the 6 people who were referred to me this year with that particular cancer, and that's going to be a challenge for us. Ultimately, we have community support for better utilisation of data to drive systems improvement. Our challenge is, how do we create the workforce, the analytic skills, the interpretive skills for that knowledge to wisdom shift, and as a result, ensure that there are more people this New Year's Eve drinking very fine champagne. Have a great day.